So what are the reasons for why Sri Lanka is going through this massive economic crisis? We look at 5 causes and 5 consequences. Cause number 1, Sri Lanka has a massive debt problem that's been caused by Chinese infrastructure funding. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China had funded projects worth $5 billion. Sri Lanka is on the verge of defaulting on that. They've requested China to restructure that debt, but Beijing has said no. Cause number 2, the tourism sector. 2 years of the pandemic has completely battered the tourism sector in Sri Lanka. Remember, anywhere between a fifth to a fourth of Sri Lanka's revenues come from the tourism sector, and that's been completely gutted as a result of the pandemic. Cause number 3, the serial blast that happened in Colombo. Even though it was in 2019, and even though the perpetrators had been arrested, it was the first time that ISIS was involved in a major terror attack in Sri Lanka, and that has also put off a number of tourists from coming to the island nation. Cause number 4, there is huge import dependence even on essential food items, fuel. Remember, a bulk of Sri Lanka's fuel is imported from countries like India. So there is huge dependence on imports, both for essential items as food and even things like petrol and diesel. And cause number 5, about 6 or so months ago, the Gotabaya Rajapaksa regime, after he became president, one of the first things that they announced was to have all organic farming. So no fertilizer, no chemicals, no pesticide. And that, of course, led to a huge crisis in the agriculture sector, particularly in the tea industry. Remember, tea is a big export industry in Sri Lanka, and the tea industry took a huge hit because of this ban on all chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, etc. So what are the consequences of this huge economic fallout that we're seeing in Sri Lanka? So the first big consequence is runaway inflation. Inflation is very high. It's in double digits. In some parts, it's upwards of 25%. Cooking gas, for example, you can't get a cylinder for anything less than 4,000 Sri Lankan rupees. A bottle of water is 100 Sri Lankan rupees. So you can imagine how runaway inflation is hitting people. And whenever inflation goes through the roof, it is the poor who get hit the most. The second consequence, people have died. People have died out of hunger. People have died in queues, waiting in queues, trying to buy fuel and food. So at least 3 people have died across the island nation just waiting in queues. And remember, it's been high temperatures as well through the months of February and March. So that is also adding to the woes there. Consequence number 3, things have gotten so bad, at least as far as the fuel situation is concerned, that the army has had to be deployed at major fuel stations in big cities like Colombo. The fourth big consequence, even student exams, school exams as well as university exams have been postponed because there is a shortage of paper, and paper happens to be, again, one of the most imported commodities in Sri Lanka. And number 5, this is naturally leading to a lot of people escaping from Sri Lanka. Just this week, we have seen the first batch of refugees arrive from northern Sri Lanka into Tamil Nadu. You will likely see a large number of Sri Lankans fleeing from the island nation, going into other countries in Europe and, of course, in the United States as well.
Sri Lanka, as island nation of the 22 million of, is fact an economy and political crisis. Driving the discontent is the worst economic downturn since the South Asia country gained independence in 1948. What the cause of economic crisis? The crisis has been here in this market, driven by the little bad luck and a lot of the government mismanagement. Over the past decade, the Sri Lanka government has borrowed away some of the money lender to the farm public service. The borrowing spread had a coincide with the series of the hammer blow to the Sri Lanka economy from the both nation disasters, such as the heavy monsoons to the man-made catastrophe, including the government ban on chemical fertilizers that decimate farmer harvest. Though the problems were compounded in the 2018 when the president dismissed of the prime minister sparked a constitutional crisis. The following years, when the hundreds of the people at church and luxury hotel were killed in the 2019 Easter bombing, and from the 2020 onward with the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the move backfired instead, hitting the government revenue that pumped, leading agency to downgrade the Sri Lanka to near the default level, meaning the country lost the access to the overseas market. Sri Lanka then has to fall back on the foreign exchange reserve to pay off the government debt, shrinking in the reserve from the 6.9 billion in the 2018 to the 2.2 billion in this year. This is the impact import to the fuel and the other essential which sent price soaring. Topping out the government in March flood the Sri Lanka loop, meaning its plight was the determined base and on the demand and supply foreign exchange market. That move appellants aimed at devaluing to the currency to qualify for the loan of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the encouraged limitings. However, the propping of the roof against the US dollar only made the thing worse of the ordinary Sri Lanka.
What does this mean for people on the ground? For Sri Lanka, the crisis has turned the daily life into an endless cycle of waiting in line for basic goods, many of which are being rationed. In recent weeks, shops have been forced to close because they cannot run fridges, air conditioner or fan. Soldiers are stationed at gas stations to calm customers who line up for hours in the ceiling hut to fill their tank. Some people have even died waiting. Some are cut in impossible positions. They have to work to feed their family, but also queue for supply. One street sweeper with two young sons tell CNN she quietly skipped away from work to join line for food before hurrying back. Even members of the middle class, which shaving are for the dead, failing their crews, run out of essential like medicine or gas, and made more difficult by frequent power cuts that plunge Colombo into darkness, sometimes more than 10 hours at a time.
What's happening with the protests? Protesters in Colombo took to the street in late March, demanding government action and accountability. Public frustration and anger erupted when demonstrators violated blinks and started fire outside the president's private residence. Police used tear gas and water cannon to break up the protests and impose a 36-hour curfew afterward. President Rajapaksa declared a nationwide public emergency on April, giving authoritarian powers to detain people without a warrant and blocked social media platforms. But protests went ahead the next day in the difference of the curfew, prompting police to arrest hundreds of demonstrators. Protests have continued in the days since they demanded largely peaceful on Thursday night. Crowd of student protesters surrounded Rajapaksa residence again, calling for his resignation.
What has the government reacted? President issued a statement but didn't directly address the resignation, only urging all parties to work together for the sake of all the citizens and future generations. The current crisis is a result of several economic factors and global developments. The statement read, as one of the leading democratic countries in Asia, solutions should be found to this within a democratic framework. Later that day, when announcing the cabinet reshuffle, the President's office released a statement saying Rajapaksa sought the support of all the people to overcome the economic challenge faced by the country. Chief governments during a parliament session that Rajapaksa will not resign under any circumstance. Fernando is a member of the ruling coalition and is seen as a close ally to the president. Previously, President has attempted to resolve the issue in an address to the nation last month that this crisis was not created by me.
What's next? Sri Lanka is now seeking financial support from the IMF and turning the regional power that may be able to help. During last month's address, President had raised two pros and cons of the working with the IMF and had decided to pursue a bailout from the Washington-based institution, something his government has been reluctant to do. Sri Lanka also request help from the China and India, with New Delhi already issuing a credit line of the $1 billion in March. But some analysts warn that this assistance might be prolonged as crisis rather than solve it. There is still much uncertainty around it come next. National concern price inflation has almost tripled from the 6.2% in September to the 17.5% in February. So according to the country's central bank, Sri Lanka has to repay about $4 billion in debt over the rest of this year, including a $1 billion international sovereign bond that matures in July. And the situation has prompted alarm from the international observers. A spokesperson of the UN High Commissioner for the Human Rights expressed concern over Sri Lanka's official response. So the government curfews, social media blackout, and police action is break up the protests could prevent or discourage people from expressing their grievance and adding this measure should not be used to dissent or hinder peaceful protests. The UN was watching closely and warned against the drift of militarization and the weakness in institutional check and balance in Sri Lanka. Thank you for your attention.